Hello there. Welcome to the Art of Mindfulness webinar. I am so excited to be here with you today, sharing a practice that is so meaningful to me personally as well as professionally. I just thought I would start by introducing myself. My name is Ashleigh Frankel, and I am one of the co-founders of the Wise Mind Company. I am also, as importantly, a recovering lawyer, perfectionist, and procrastinator. And I share that because I like to say that if I could change using the power of mindfulness practices and others, then there's hope for everyone. Just a bit about the Wise Mind Company, so you have a sense of what my experience and professional background is besides the law. So the Wise Mind Company is a consulting and development firm, and we work with organizations to create well-work cultures where individuals and business can flourish. We also do coaching with individuals as well as teams. And I like to say that we're hardcore about soft skills. And by soft skills, I'm referring to skills like communication, compassion, resilience, vulnerability, and mindfulness. And in our current work culture, these soft skills are really becoming core skills. I just thought I would start us off with this image of the untrained mind, because this really is the reason why we do the work that we do at the Wise Mind Company. I like to say that an untrained mind is essentially an untamed mind. And I thought in the context of job searches or anticipating a career change, this might be particularly relatable. And I was thinking that to kick us off, we have this fantastic chat feature on the right-hand side. And I was wondering if we could start off by maybe sharing what are some emotions or words that you would use to describe your job search or your experience anticipating or trying to make a career change. And so, we don't have to think too much about it, but maybe just share what comes to mind first for you. So stressful and anxious, overwhelmed, yeah, hopeful, soul searching, interesting, confusion. Yeah, certainly. So there are a range of emotions associated with our job search. And someone mentioned exciting too, and hopeful time, which is part of it, of course, but it can also be, as we see even from the comments that we have, a time that's overwhelming, a time of anxiety, confusion, stress, overwhelm. And a lot of that comes from the fact that it's a time of uncertainty and that there are so many demands on our time and energy. So I think my mind looks like this mess of color on any given day at times. So the regular demands of our lives. But then when you add on something that's large and there's a lot of uncertainty around it and change associated with it, our state of mind can really become exacerbated in terms of our stress and anxiety and worry. And in part, this is just because on top of our everyday steady state stuff, we now have things to think and worry about, like LinkedIn profiles and our resumes and networking and some of the hard skill development and interview prep, just to name a few. Right? And so this is really why we're talking about the art of mindfulness today. Because there is so much that we can't control when it comes to our life circumstances and when it comes to the outcomes, for example, of our efforts in our job search. But as Jon Kabat-Zinn says, You cannot stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And that is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to explore the art of mindfulness, which is going to be the practice that helps us learn to surf through these challenging and uncertain times. So just to give you a brief sense of where we're going today in our time together, we're going to start off by looking at what mindfulness is, starting to understand some of the benefits of mindfulness, and specifically in the context of job searching and career change. We're then going to talk about how do we practice this tool. And I'm going to give you specific mindfulness practices. We're actually going to work with them together today that support 3 key areas that are really critical for job search success. The first, as you might imagine from our discussion so far, is stress management. Then we're going to look at how we can apply mindfulness for a mindset for success. And lastly, we're going to look at tools for practicing mindfulness for energy management. Oftentimes, a job search is more like a marathon than a sprint. And so it's really important that we cultivate practices and habits that are going to support us in managing the overwhelm and staying out of burnout so that we can be there to cross the finish line, if you will. We have a wonderful poll feature, and I've never used this actually in a webinar before, but I thought we would play with this. And I wanted to know, in the polls, you'll see a question of, are you familiar with mindfulness? So I just thought if you could chime in there and let us know, it'll help to give us a sense of who's participating and where to take this. Okay, so far we have 21 answers, and it looks like a large percent of you are familiar with mindfulness. And for some of you, this is new for you. And so with mindfulness, one of the core principles is this idea of a beginner's mind. So for those of you that this is new, you're going to come to it with a fresh mind anyways, which is great. For those of you who are familiar with mindfulness, you may want to practice just bringing this mindset as if this is new for you and see what new things you learn today or how this bolsters your current experience with the practice. And then I wanted to follow that question up and just get a sense of, do you practice mindfulness? Yes or no? And so I think that question is going to come next in the polls. Do you have a mindfulness practice? Okay. So it's still calibrating, but as you can probably see in the polls, and now it's switched over. So while we have a lot of familiarity with mindfulness, it hasn't yet converted, I hope that's going to change today, into a mindfulness practice. And so what's really important about mindfulness is that word practice, that it is a practice. So knowing about it is great, that opens the door. But today we're going to actually start moving into the practice of mindfulness, and that's where you get the benefit. So thank you for participating in that poll. It's really great to know who is present with us today and what your familiarity is. I think I want to take an opportunity actually to mention here that we're going to take questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to type in your questions if you have them, and we'll keep track of them, and then we can go through as many as possible at the end of our session. So let's move into this, shall we? Other than a buzzword, what is mindfulness? So we'll start with a rather formal definition of mindfulness, and then I'll hope to make it more relatable for you. Mindfulness has been defined as the practice of paying attention in a particular way. And that particular way is on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So essentially, mindfulness is really focused on 3 core things. It's about our attention, so being able to focus our attention in a particular direction in a particular place. And that's become increasingly more challenging in our very disrupted world, right? We're constantly inundated with information and emails and multitasking. And so over time, our ability to focus and place our attention has diminished. And so like any muscle, if we're not using it, it will atrophy. So we can think of our focus and attention that way. It's really important to start actually strengthening that ability. The other piece is awareness. So once we can focus our attention, we have the ability to become aware, to wake up to whatever may be present in terms of our emotions, our thinking, our current reality. And the last piece is the intention piece. So it's, going back to that picture of the mind that we showed earlier and all the colors and the messiness, we spend a lot of our time on autopilot. And when we're on autopilot, we are not intentional. So we're just reacting to things around us. Mindfulness helps us learn how to be intentional about where we put our focus and our energy. And essentially, we all have the capacity for mindfulness. Mindfulness is an internal resource that is within us all already. Okay? So the idea is that with practice, we learn how to channel or direct this resource in a way that really helps to transform our relationships with all things. So with stress, with colleagues, with family, our relationship to our emotions, our pain, illness, even to the world around us. I love the analogy of mindfulness being like mind fitness. So for those of you that are newer to this mindfulness concept, you're likely familiar with the benefits of physical exercise for our body and even for our mindset. So we know that if we want to run a marathon, we're not just going to go and do it without training. We know that if we train and we run over time, we build up the ability, it helps us perform better in that marathon. Similarly, physical exercise and training will help improve our performance on a soccer field, for example. Or that if we engage in strength training, we can strengthen our core for better balance and better just overall physical health and well-being. So you might just want to think of mindfulness as the mind fitness. Okay, so essentially the practice of mindfulness is emotional and mental fitness. I love to bust some myths about mindfulness because I think that sometimes the myths that we hold keep some people from engaging with mindfulness because of these preconceived notions that actually aren't accurate. And so let's just bust them now before we move for any further. Mindfulness is not unicorns and rainbows, first of all. So if you've seen posts about mindfulness on social media, you may have read things about it bringing happiness and joy and peace and serenity and basically making your life unicorns and rainbows. And while mindfulness can bring a feeling of calm or can induce greater sense of happiness, it certainly isn't all about that. In fact, sometimes because mindfulness is about bringing awareness and familiarity and waking up to our emotions, if those emotions are difficult, then mindfulness practice can be uncomfortable at times, even though it's beneficial. Okay, so it's not unicorns and rainbows. Similarly, it's not happiness. It's a practice. Mindfulness is also not about emptying our mind. So I think this is one of the biggest preconceived notions. When I'm working with people, they'll often say to me, I can't meditate because I'm always thinking, my mind is always on. And I say, well, that's a good thing because we need to think thoughts, right? We need to be thinking. That's what the brain is supposed to do. the practice of mindfulness is not about clearing our minds of thoughts. The practice of mindfulness is about becoming aware of what those thoughts are. Okay, and we're going to talk about why that matters in a minute. And then when I say that mindfulness is not meditation, I put this here because while meditation is one way to practice mindfulness, it isn't the only way. And so today we're going to practice mindfulness meditation, but then we're also going to explore a number of practices that are what we call informal mindfulness practices that don't require us to be sitting still and closing our eyes, but are more applying mindfulness to our everyday or to our experiences within our day. Okay? So if you have any questions about this or curiosities, please just write them down and we will hopefully get to them at the end of this session. I think that this slide is particularly important because it does a great job of illustrating ultimately what I think is so valuable about mindfulness practice. So without mindfulness, what we have is any stimulus, so anything that's happening around us, and then that triggers a reaction. Okay, so it's habituated a lot of the times, and we don't even think about the process. It just happens. So for example, you may get an email and you may get some information in that email from a boss that you don't like or from a friend that's difficult to hear. And without mindfulness, it may look like just firing off a quick response that's really emotional and reactive to that information. With mindfulness practice, so over time, what we end up cultivating is we have the stimulus and then we have mindfulness, which really is just this brief pause or 1 second. And what that does is it allows us to come off of autopilot, out of reactivity, and we can cultivate what we refer to as a wise response. We're replacing impulsive reactions with thoughtful responses. Okay, so simply put, mindfulness gives us choice. And in that choice is freedom for us to choose. Okay? I think the title probably alluded to this, The Art of Mindfulness. We're not going to spend a lot of time today on the science of mindfulness, but I do think it's really important to let you know, particularly if we have any skeptics that are listening right now, that there in the last 15 years, and it continues to rise, there has been an explosion in scientific research around the benefits of mindfulness. There are thousands and thousands of studies and research papers, and it's very compelling. So what we see through the research is that mindfulness practice has a positive impact on every single aspect of our well-being. I just wanted to share with you some of the many benefits of this mind fitness practice. So what we know is that it helps with stress management. It empowers us with greater emotional intelligence and resilience. And this is really important, for example, for job searches, which can be quite triggering and can weigh on us a lot. But I want you to know also that this is critical for leadership. Okay, and I mean that with a small L and a capital L. So it doesn't mean you have to be in a leadership role, but we are all leaders in whatever role we are in the workplace or in our lives. And emotional intelligence and resilience are two of the most important leadership traits. So while we're developing mindfulness or we're talking about it in the context of the season of life you're in right now, know that this is laying the foundation for what we call wise leadership, but really leadership that we need now and for the future of work. The practice increases focus. It increases creativity and flexible thinking, allowing us to navigate change and adapt also to innovate. We know that it's directly linked to an increased productivity as well as an increase in positive emotions. And perhaps most interestingly, there have been brain scans done of meditators, so mindfulness meditation in particular, and even over a short period of time. And these are the brains not of monks who are meditating much of their lives, but actually of people like you and I, who are even new to mindfulness meditation. And over a relatively short period of time, what we see is that the brain actually changes from practicing mindfulness meditation. And it changes in many different ways. But the one that I just want to share with you, because I think it's really fascinating, is that what we see is that the part of the brain that's responsible for triggering our stress response, otherwise referred to as fight, flight, or freeze, actually shrinks. So it gets smaller, so it triggers less. And the part of the brain responsible for our executive function, so things like problem solving, your ability to create, innovate, perspective taking, that actually gets more gray matter. So it gets thicker. And that's a good thing. And so the practice itself is really powerful in the moment and as you're practicing it. But over time, it actually changes the brain so that you can create, your brain is actually better able to support us in times of stress, and we get triggered less by those challenges, and we can actually perform better during those times. At the end of the day, this is so important because, as this slide says, success starts in the mind, okay? And I love this quote to illustrate it by Henry Ford, which says, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. So what we know is that we spend a lot of time, for example, when we're looking to find a job, we spend a lot of time on all the things we need to do, like updating our LinkedIn profile, making sure that we have all the skills, the hard skills that we need for that particular job, learning interview skills, networking skills, and the list goes on. Those are all critically important. But at the root of it all is the mindset that we hold. And if, how we think about things really impacts the results that we generate. And so we want to be spending time cultivating a mindset for success, essentially mind fitness through the practice of mindfulness. And I want to illustrate to you how powerful our thinking is, just to keep digging a little deeper on that quote that I just shared. Okay, because where your thoughts go, your energy flows. And I had a recent situation that illustrates this perfectly. So I want to share this with you briefly. Okay, so oftentimes we think of, I think, a triggering event. So for example, let's just say that we had a job interview that we felt went really well for a job that we were super excited about. And then you found out that you didn't get the job. So you have these feelings about that job loss, the fact that you didn't get that job. So we think that it's the situation that triggers the feelings about it. But actually, if you were to, the slow motion feature on your camera on your phone where you can slow something down, if you were to slow that sequence down, what you would find is that it's not the situation that triggers those feelings. It's the thoughts about the situation that triggers the feelings. Okay, and this is going to just explain to you why we're spending time today working with mindfulness or thinking about our thinking, if you will. Okay, so what's the recent experience that I had with this? Because we're always learning. And So we're launching a new product, and it's very meaningful to us. And there was somebody that I wanted to be involved in this. I think really highly of her work. She's exceptional in the space of mindfulness and meditation. And so I reached out on Instagram to her, and I sent her one of those voice notes in the message feature. And I felt brave and courageous doing that because I was nervous. And we had been communicating back and forth, and then I didn't hear anything from her after I sent those voice notes. And so I had the thought at first that she wasn't interested, that my request and invitation to tell her more about this new offering and product and our desire to have her involved in it just really didn't resonate for her. Those were the thoughts that I was having at first. And I'm just curious, maybe in the chat, if you might throw down, what do you think some of the feelings would be that I might be feeling having had that thought? So the thought is, so I didn't hear from her, and my thinking is she's really not interested. She doesn't think it's a good idea. She doesn't want to hear any more about it. What would you think I might be feeling? Or what would you be feeling if that happened? Rejection, another rejected. Yeah. Disappointed, upset, discouraged, fear, worried, confused. Absolutely. Sad. Yeah, more confused. So when I was having those thoughts, I was feeling rejected. I was feeling vulnerable. I was feeling all of a sudden like this idea wasn't important. My strong convictions around it were sort of waning. And then, so following up from that, I love the involvement. So if we can keep this going, what do you think the action I might take or not take based on those feelings? Give up. Yeah, give up. Yeah, we have a couple of people saying give up. Okay, try a different approach. Interesting. Yeah, you probably would not reach out. Yeah, thank you for that. So that was very much sulk. Yeah, that was very much the case. So I could see how that would happen, right, with that thinking. And actually in my past, prior to my mindfulness training, I can guarantee you I would never, temporary depression, absolutely, I would never have reached out again. And not only would I have never reached out again about that, but I probably wouldn't have reached out to her again about anything. I just want to rewind, and I want to play this through again. Changing the thoughts, which I actually did do. So same scenario, I send her the voice notes, I tell her, I bare my soul to her about this new project that we're really passionate about and how we'd love her to be involved. And she never responds. And then I think to myself, maybe she didn't see it. She's got a thriving business. She's really engaged on Instagram. I bet you she has a lot of people reaching out to her in her DMs. I think she probably missed it. Just curious, with those thoughts, how do you think I might feel? Hopeful, curious, somewhat hopeful. Yeah, I'm just reading you some of the responses. Absolutely. And so, and I'm optimistic and not bothered as much. Right. So that's exactly it. And so I've already got some people responding with how that might impact the actions. And so this is what I want to show you. The feelings that I had when I changed my thinking were absolutely hopeful, curious, and I then actually did, when I heard from her again, I had that mindset. I made myself stick with those more positive thoughts. And I followed up with her and I said, hey, I'm not sure if you missed those original voice texts. And what do you know? She wrote me back right away and said, I missed them. I'm so sorry. And not only that, but she's so excited about this project. And we have a meeting next week about it. I share this with you because I think it's one thing to tell you these things, that thoughts inform your feelings and your actions, but it's really impactful when you see how that plays out. And I just invite you to think about how that relates to your own experiences. And we're going to play with this as we move along. So just to contextualize this with you before we start a meditation practice, even more so for your job search and that season of life that you're in right now, I want you to see specifically how mindfulness is a superpower for your job search success, okay? So it helps you in two broad ways: survive this challenging time and also thrive. And this is why I find it such a great investment of our time and energy. It helps us survive by empowering us with tools to stay focused, reduce the overwhelm, avoid the burnout, and manage stress, all of which are things that you mentioned when we first explored what comes up for us around our job searches. At the same time, this same practice helps us thrive. It helps us cultivate conditions for high performance, including optimism and self-compassion. And so that is what we're going to work with from now until the end of this webinar. There are two ways, as I mentioned earlier, to practice mindfulness. One is what we call formal practice, and that's through meditation. It's really important because it really helps us cultivate awareness of what's going on within us, which lays the foundation for then being able to choose and work with the rest of like the qualities of mindfulness, like compassion and non-judgment and kindness and curiosity that we're going to apply later in this webinar. So I want to start us off, since we're all here now, we may as well use this time to actually experience the power of mindfulness meditation. And for us to see what it feels like and what that experience is like. So if you're in a place, for example, you're listening to this at a coffee shop or something where you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes and tuning in, then know that you can listen to this guided brief meditation with your eyes open and just see what the experience is like for you. But otherwise, I want to invite you for this formal practice to get comfortable in your seated position and have your feet firmly planted on the floor. And we're going to close our eyes for it because we are trying to tune in and develop some awareness of our thoughts and feelings and sensations. But if closing your eyes is uncomfortable for you for any reason, then you can always keep them open and just have a soft gaze at the floor. And I just want to remind you that this is not about trying to stop our thoughts. And also, if you can breathe, you can meditate. Okay, so we're going to do a really short practice that is called a mindful check-in, and it just helps us cultivate that awareness of our internal environment. So closing down your eyes if you haven't already. Just beginning by noticing your body breathing. Okay, so don't change your breath at all. We don't need to change it at this point, but we just want to notice it. We want to become aware of it. We want to bring our mind from wherever it is. Maybe you're hungry, or you've got a few emails that were coming through that were distracting you. So by bringing our attention to our breath right now, we're just taking it from all those other places. And we're going to bring it right here to the present moment by anchoring to our breath. That's it. And when your thoughts take you away from your breath, which they will, then when you notice that you're off thinking about something else, with non-judgment and kindness, gently just bring your attention back to your breathing. Okay, it's that simple, but it's not easy. Now, I want to invite you to bring your attention to the physical body. So I want you to notice, maybe bring your attention to the top of your head and just allow it to go down your body to the tips of your toes. And notice any physical sensations that are present. Okay, so you may just note them. Okay, try not to get hung up on them or judge them or even change them, but just notice. Am I feeling tension anywhere? Is there tension in my neck, in my shoulders, in my jaw? Maybe you notice all of a sudden that there's a bit of a painful knee, an injury from the gym or a run. Okay, our body is full of information for us. So just becoming aware of what's present. And releasing the attention on your body, your physical sensations, and bringing your awareness to your thoughts. Okay? So often our thoughts, we're not even aware of what we're thinking. And yet those thoughts are directing our feelings and then our actions. And so we want to start to cultivate some awareness of our thoughts. Okay, so just with ease, noticing what your thoughts are, if any. You might want to notice the quality of the thought. So is it anxious? Is it positive? Is it more negative? Are you ruminating on one thought? Is there one thing that keeps persisting? And release your awareness on your thoughts. And lastly, bringing your attention into your body and maybe taking a deep breath, because this can be a little bit more challenging for people. And that is noticing what feelings and emotions are present in your body. Okay, you might want to think of this practice as paying better attention to, for example, like your car's dashboard, so that you know earlier if something beneath the hood is not right, and allows you to take a proactive approach and the necessary steps to fix it so that it can perform optimally. In this case, we're talking about our mind. Now I want to invite you to bring your attention back to your breath. And we're going to finish the practice with a mindful breath practice or a calming breath. So I'm going to guide you to inhale through your nose for a count of 4, and then hold the breath in your belly for 7, and exhale fully and completely through your mouth for a count of 8. Inhaling through the nose, we'll do this 2 more times. Holding in the belly, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhaling fully and completely through the mouth for a count of 8. And 1 more time. Inhaling for a count of 4. Holding for 7. And exhaling completely and slowly for a count of 8. And then allow the breath to come back to its natural rhythm. And I just want you to pause here before bringing yourself back into your space and notice how you feel in this moment. And when you're ready, I'd love for you to just share that in a word or 2 in our chat. So how are you feeling now after that mindful breath practice? And most importantly, for yourself. So noticing the change. And what we're hearing here is things like relaxed, still, clear, calm, rejuvenated, centered, really important. Unburdened and focused. Thank you for sharing that experience. So this brings us to practice number 2, which is mindful breath. And we did this practice in that formal meditation. I just want to explain to you, so I said I was going to share practices for stress management, mindset management, and energy management. So this mindful breath practice is powerful for anxiety and stress management. I live with an anxiety disorder, And I can tell you from my personal experience that this mindful breath practice has empowered me to be able to move through anxiety in a way that I never thought possible. Okay, so when we are stressed, let's just talk about this for one brief moment. When we're stressed, so stress in certain doses can actually be very motivating and good for us. But stress over the long term, where it's prolonged and is something we experience quite often while we're doing something like a job search that can take a long time, can really have a negative impact on us. It can impact our executive function, so our problem solving, our creativity. It can cause us to be really focused on our fears and perceived problems. And so we aren't solution focused, and it really can reduce our ability to perform. The blood, when we're stressed out, flows away from the brain. And as Dan Goleman, so he is a very popular researcher and writer in the area of emotional intelligence, he just says it very bluntly. He says, stress makes us stupid, okay? The mindful breath, why it's so powerful, is that it actually reverses the stress response in your body. So there's two things that are critical about this breath, is that it can really help us with stress physiologically and psychologically. So physiologically, by tuning into the breath, what happens is the breath gets deeper. And when the breath gets deeper, it triggers our parasympathetic nervous system, which is essentially your relaxation response. Psychologically, what happens is it brings you into the present moment. And anxiety is a very future-focused emotion and state of mind. And so when you come into the present moment, feelings of regret, which is really about the past, and anxiety and worry, which is about the future, you're freed from them. And in that moment of being freed from them, it allows your body to restore and to rest, which is critical for our ability to avoid burnout and stay in a state of optimal performance. So this is a really powerful way of practicing mindfulness for stress management. I want to now bring us to our third practice, in which is self-compassion. Okay, so this may feel soft for some of you, but actually it's very strong. It's a really important component of strengthened leadership and also self-leadership. So often in our culture, when we think we need more self-discipline, what we actually need is more self-love. And so what we know from the research, the science around self-compassion, is that self-compassion actually helps us perform better. When we are hypercritical of ourselves, when we are stuck in judgment, when our inner critic is really loud, which tends to happen when we're stressed out and anxious, we actually perform, it doesn't motivate us, although we may think it does. Like we think we have to be really hard on ourselves. That's that like perfectionist part of me, always thinking I had to be hard on myself to drive performance. But what we now know from the science is that with kindness and compassion, we increase our ability to learn from our mistakes. We expand our perspective. And with that, we can show up with more clarity, energy, positivity, and possibility to everything that we're doing. And mindfulness, one of the key qualities of mindfulness is kindness and compassion. And what it can do is really turn down that negative self-talk. So I want to share with you what this might look like, okay, and get us to work with this. And you may also hear a little bit of yourself in some of these responses. So the mindfulness practice that we're going to work with is about putting our intention to our responses. So we talk about it as a wise response versus a reactive judgment. Okay, so I have a couple situations here to illustrate this. The first one is you send out several resumes and you don't get any bites. The reactive judgment would be, I'm clearly a terrible candidate because no one is responding. This you might also think of as your inner critic, which we tend to be quite familiar with. The wise response, or the compassionate response, would be, the more at-bats I take, the more likely I am to hit something. Okay, situation number 2. Despite leaving early for an interview, you get stuck in major traffic and arrive 5 minutes late. The reactive judgment is, I blew this already. But the wise response would be, this isn't the best start, but I can still make a great impression. Okay, so I want to play with this. Situation 3, you come in as second choice for 2 jobs in a row. The reactive judgment might sound like, I'm never going to be chosen. I'm going to be stuck living in my parents' basement forever. The wise response might be, so I want us to practice this because we have such habituated patterns of being so critical with ourselves. So this takes practice, but over in the public chat, if you wouldn't mind, what might be a wise response instead? I'm getting that much closer to getting the job I'm meant to have. Absolutely. If I keep getting this close, I'll land the right one very soon. I came so close, I'm obviously capable. And I just want you to notice for yourself, one man's trash is another man's treasure. That's another response. This interview is good practice. Brilliant. And so even as I'm reading those to you, I'm just wanting you to notice the change in energy. I'm even feeling it, going from defeated and depleted, and how that might impact your next actions, to a mindset of possibility, and how that then impacts the actions that you take. The other point here for self-compassion is just to meet your inner ally. I would encourage you to spend time identifying your strengths and your accomplishments and keep them close by so that you can remind yourself when things get difficult of what you're capable of and all the things you've accomplished. And so that you remember that you are not your resume. You are not the job you didn't get. Okay, but that you do have all these strengths and all of this to offer. This takes us to our 4th practice, so 4 of 5. And this is also related to cultivating a mindset for success. This relates to how we can power up positivity. And at the root of this is this simple idea that what you water grows. Okay, so the question is, are you watering the weeds or are you watering the flowers? Okay, and I know that this might sound a bit, Pollyanna-ish. This is not about bypassing the difficult feelings. We want to embrace all of our emotions, the easy ones, the hard ones, and become aware of them and work with them. But we also want to consciously start to notice what's right, to notice the positive. In this renowned resilience training from the University of Pennsylvania, they just give a simple acronym, HGTS, Hunt the Good Stuff. Okay, and the reason this is important is because the brain has this really tricky feature called the negativity bias. And the negativity bias is that we have this, it's evolutionary, but we tend to actually really lean towards the negative, and we think of it as a way of protecting ourselves. But what happens with a negativity bias is that negativity kind of spirals us down. It takes us away from this broad perspective taking and solution-oriented thinking. And it really narrows our focus to this threat, or more of the time, it's a perceived threat. It's not even real. And so we focus on what's wrong and how to protect ourselves from this fear of failure, fear of being judged, fear of looking like a fool at a networking event, for example. And so what we want to do is shift that, and we can, because without getting into this science, the brain can change. It's a fancy word called neuroplasticity, and essentially the brain can change. So with a little bit of mindfulness and placing our attention with intention on the things that are positive, we can begin to balance the brain's negativity bias by strengthening the brain's positivity networks. How do we do this? Like all of what we've talked about today, it's simple, but not always easy. Okay, so I want to give you 3 practices that I hope you'll take away with you today and try out to really begin to help us strengthen those positivity networks and ultimately create a mindset for success. The first is curious questions. Okay, so this helps keep us out of judgment, and that's what our brain tends to want to do. And as you might recall, non-judgment is a quality of mindfulness. It's one of the core mindfulness qualities. So curious questions can look like, what went well today? What's possible? What is the opportunity in this? Or simply, what's right? You know how often we ask people, oh, what's wrong? But we don't tend to ask what's right of ourselves, even of this life, of this situation. And so it can be as simple as like actually just putting this in your daytime or putting it in your calendar. And at the end of the day, making a habit of asking yourself what went well today. Or at the end of the week, or after a difficult interview or situation, asking yourself what's possible, what's the opportunity in this. It takes practice to start to kind of have it be a habit. But as you play with this and you start to see what this opens up to, you tend to want to use them more often. The second is to celebrate the small wins. So I think that in a situation like job hunting, it can be so easy to fixate on the end result and lose track of all of the small wins that have happened along the way. I also love this because it means that we're taking ownership. So we're not waiting, for example, for getting the job to tell us that we've succeeded, quote unquote. We're succeeding every day when we're making the effort. So remembering to focus on the present moment and the process and to celebrate those wins, not just the product in the end. And lastly, sharing gratitude. So in the research around gratitude, it's been said that this is the antidote to work stress, to stress, period, in our lives, is the practice of gratitude. And so I also love how it impacts one another. So I would just love it if we would share in the chat as I keep going and people can read it and be inspired by it, just thinking about something that you're grateful for. When we turn our mind to what we're grateful for, it really helps us start to see all the things that are right when we might otherwise be noticing all the things that aren't going so well. Okay, so this practice really starts to flex that part of your mind, those positivity networks. And puts it in perspective. We can get so in the tunnel vision of what we're working towards. So in our conversation today, working towards this perfect job or our dream job or a job, any job to get us out of our parents' basement or to help us pay the bills. And so we get very focused on that. But gratitude makes us realize that there is so much more than just this particular endeavor. The last piece is around energy management. And I'm going to keep this short because I want to get to your questions, but I also want you to remember how important this is. Happiness researcher out of Harvard, Sean Achor, says, how we restore is as important as how we endure. When we are, so here with practice 5, I've illustrated this point just with the pause button. And this word I love, NIKSEN, which is a lifestyle concept from the Netherlands, actually. And it translates essentially into doing nothing. Doing nothing is so undervalued. And in our culture that has us being always on and striving so much of the time, we forget to just pause. And what I want you to know is that in that pause is so much. It's not nothing at all. When we pause, our brain is not idle. It actually provides us with precious time to restore and reboot. Okay, and so just like your phone, for example, needs an opportunity to recharge, so do we. If we want to perform optimally, and we want to access clarity and calm and really be able to show up at our best, we need to restore. Mindfulness allows us to create these micro moments of pause that are just enough to help us reset. So you might just even think about pausing and taking a breath before you go into your interview, or disconnecting for a little bit of time from technology and messages and information and social media to allow yourself to recenter and regroup. And then I also like to fold into this idea of prioritizing some things that fill you up. We can get so caught up in what we're chasing, and we forget to tap into the things that energize us and make us feel good. So make a list of the things that you love to do, the people you love to be around. Take a pause from the job search or the other demands of your life and show up in a phone call, in your relationship, playing guitar, building Lego with your children, on a walk outside, mindfully and present. Bring all your attention and your awareness to that activity. And the magic that happens. There's a reason why we get our best ideas and insights in the shower or on a walk. It's because we've disconnected from the pressure and the stress, and we've reconnected and rebooted. And the last thing I want to say before some questions is, you've totally got this. So I just want to open it up to the questions that I think have been gathered. Wondering where I find that. Oh, there we go. So I have one question sitting here, and if there's more, please type them in. But what I see is I tend to overthink things and situations. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the courage to share and that you're not alone. I was wondering how to cherish positivity and still be realistic. How do I know that my wise responses aren't just lies that I'm telling myself? Interesting. Well, I mean, what I would say to that sort of generally is that I think you would intuitively feel if it's a lie out of nowhere. I want to tell you that most often the reaction, so we like to say that our thoughts are not facts. They're just thoughts. And it doesn't mean that we can't assess a situation clearly and look at what we can learn. It doesn't mean that there aren't areas for us to improve or do better. But more often, when you take a pause and you offer yourself some compassionate feedback, that is the truth. And regardless, it's what it helps shift into. In other words, it's the state it helps shift you into, right? So if we can be kind to ourselves, you don't even have to tell yourself anything in particular. It's about the attitude you bring to yourself. So you may not switch out a negative thought, but you may actually just comfort yourself. And offering ourselves self-compassion can just be speaking to ourselves the way that we would speak to a really good friend. And so it's not necessarily dismissing the thoughts that we're having necessarily, but it's just the attitude and energy we bring to ourselves in response to those thoughts. So I hope that helps. Cherishing positivity, which I love in there. How do I cherish positivity? I think that we just begin small and take it one step at a time. And just bite size, not expect ourselves to be in a positive mindset all the time. What if I don't have time to practice mindfulness? How long do I need to practice for so that it makes a difference? Oh, I love this. I get this question all the time. And I will tell you this, the time matters much less than consistency. So what I would do is start with what you feel is realistic for you. And so I think in this question, we're talking about the formal practice of mindfulness. so meditation, and that you can start with 30 seconds. So we've seen that in 30 seconds of mindfulness, so if you're just focusing on your breath for 30 seconds, if you do that consistently, let's say 3 times a day, every day, you can start to really shift the habits and see the benefits. So I would say, number one, worry less about how long and more about how consistently you're engaging in the practice. What I would also say is when we feel like we don't have time for mindfulness is usually when we need it the most. And just to remember that mindfulness doesn't have to take more time. It's an attitude that we bring to our lives. And so if you can't sit in formal meditation, bring the attitude of mindfulness to your interactions. Think of bringing curiosity, non-judgment, kindness, and compassion to the things you're doing and the people you're engaging with, and you will be practicing mindfulness. I hope that you found this helpful, and I just wish you all the best in this season of your life and in all that's to come. Thank you for being here.